Hi, I'm Mike Glenn, and this is the podcast for the Engaged Church Network. Today we have one of my longest friends, and that's because I met him when he was, middle school, high school?
18.
18.
Close enough.
It was, so Brian Coates, who is the executive pastor for the Brentwood campus, Brentwood Baptist Church. But I first met Brian when he came as an intern.
That's right.
Wasn't it? In the youth ministry?
Yes, sir.
And from there, we couldn't get rid of him. He went to seminary, then got his PhD in leadership, always kept circling back around in a variety of roles. And finally, we put him in a place of administration and leadership, and he has thrived in that. And one of the fun things about being at a church for 32 years is being able to watch people like Brian grab hold of their call, develop that call, and then execute that call in a way that causes the church to thrive. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. We're going to talk about Brian's own journey and then what he's learned about leadership in the local congregation. So Brian, kind of give us the cliff notes of the Brian Coates story of where you started. You grew up in a pastor's home.
I did. That's correct. So grew up outside of D.C., Northern Virginia. My dad was his role was called Minister of Education.
Mm-hmm.
So catch-all, number 2 in the church. Did a lot of things. Never thought that I would get into ministry because, you see your dad do all this stuff. You're like, I don't know if that's really what I want to do. But the Lord started working in my heart when I was about 17, 18 years old and drew me down here. One of his friends worked in Nashville, so got down here, came to Belmont. And really part of my story is your sons and Jonathan Whitehurst invited me to come to Brentwood one Sunday when I first got to Belmont. And, as the Lord worked it out, that first Sunday, it just so happened I would run into and get introduced to Jay, and I started interning for him. I was like, hey, if you ever need an intern, I'd love to help out. I'd love to find out more about what it's like to be in ministry. And he said, hey, come by this week. I need an intern. I didn't know at the time he had no help. He didn't have any staff working with him then. And so I just jumped right in. And like you said, you guys kept letting me stick around.
Right.
I think the cool thing over my time is I went from an intern to being a student minister. The church lovingly kicked me out when they sent me to seminary and said, hey, we're going to support you. We're going to train you. And then when I got done with my master's, you welcomed me back and said, hey, we want you to help launch out at Station Hill, work there, allowed me to grow in my gifting. And then as that happened, more and more people invested in me, people like Jim Baker, you, Jay, others. And then the opportunities kept opening up. And over time went from student ministry to groups to executive pastor work and to what I'm doing now here at the Brentwood campus. So it's just been a journey of people investing in me, affirming my gifting, and allowing me to step into different roles, even if I might mess up.
Right. So let's talk about this process of going from a student minister, which is high people, high energy, to executive.
Yeah.
Executive pastor, which is kind of one step away from the people. You work with the ministers who then do the ministry kind of stuff.
Yeah. So for me, student ministry, I'll tell you first off the bat, I was like probably the most boring middle school minister there is. Like I wasn't going to be the rah-rah guy. I wasn't going to be the guy that did all the games and get messy or whatever. But the cool thing about the way our student ministry was set up in those days was I got to be the guy that organized all the groups. So I'd do a lot of the administrative tasks and figure out where the groups were going to meet. And my role got to be more of, hey, play to your strengths. So
Exactly
I was encouraged to, you be the guy that goes to the school and builds the relationships in those smaller groups. And you invest in the details. So even then, the Lord was preparing me and expanding my gifts and allowing me to utilize those in a skill set that fit with me. So I wasn't forced to be the prototypical student minister, the fun guy, but even in student ministry, I was allowed to grow in that way.
Okay. So how did you recognize that your gifting was different? Did you have conversations?
Yeah.
So, we both worked with Jim Baker for a long time, who was probably the best executive pastor that certainly that I know of.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways defined the role coming up the way that he did. So when he starts investing in you or starts saying, hey, you may do this well, what happens?
Yeah. So for me, that part of the story, it was really interesting. I came back from seminary and I was working at Station Hill. I got a couple opportunities to preach.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not like prideful about it, but I'm not like a super great preacher, but I don't do terrible either.
Right.
And I was trying to figure out, like, do I go the Jay route, the Aaron route? Do I try to pursue being a campus pastor? Because that's what I knew.
Right.
Like, you invested in Jay and in Aaron, and then they took those steps up to campus pastor role. So I was like, maybe that's me. But I'll never forget, I sat down with Jim one day and he was like, Brian, how do you feel when you get off the stage after you're done preaching? Mm-hmm. I'm like, relieved. It's like, I'm ready to go take a nap. And he was like, you don't need to be a campus pastor. And I was like, why? And he said, well, Mike, as soon as he gets off the stage, he's ready to be back up in 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Jay
Same
and
thing.
Aaron, it's like, that's what they live for.
Mm-hmm.
And that began a conversation with the two of us about my giftedness
mm-hmm.
and the way that I was wired. And for me to have a guy like him who I respected, saw his faithfulness and how the Lord used him to build up the church.
Well, I think saying and saw the way that he changed things at Brentwood. I actually saw the value of that ministry.
Yeah. And so he began to call those out and to affirm that. He's
mm-hmm.
like, Brian, this is what you're naturally inclined to. This is what you start to do every time you're working in the church. And so that began the mentoring process for me to call out those gifts.
Then you go off to seminary, come back, get your PhD in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So what are those leadership principles that you have learned and have seen as critical in the life of the local church?
Well, and again, I've given you a hard time about this before. Half the reason I got my PhD was one time randomly, offhanded, you said, you need to go get your PhD. I was like, why? He said, you just need to do it. You don't want to look back and regret that you didn't do it. Yeah. So I blame you for the money and the time.
So here I was being prophetic. And I did.
Speaking that over me. No, when I went.
Well, let me tell you why I said that. One, to piggyback with what Jim Baker said in your life, you had all of the giftings to do that and do that well. And then be able to interpret and bring that back to the life of the local church.
Oh, thanks.
And now you have, you can stay in the academic world, you can stay, I hope you stay in the local church, but to be able to understand what quality leadership looks like at that depth, is huge for us. Yeah,
and I think what I learned there was honestly, in an affirming way, it just confirmed a lot of what I had done at Brentwood.
Right.
I went off to learn more about the practical side of ministry leadership, and I did. It's invaluable what I gained from that PhD, but a lot of it was like, hey, what we were doing in the church, how we were training and developing leaders,
mm-hmm.
and how we invested in our employees was really a template for what all churches should do.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my research started out of what I experienced working at Brentwood. Because for me, working at Brentwood, there was always a commitment to employee or self-development. Right? We always had set aside for us a self-development budget.
Mm-hmm.
So we could go to classes, get training,
mm-hmm.
read books, go to conferences, whatever it was. It was always a commitment by the church to invest in my growth and my development and my gifts. So what I wanted to research was, are there other churches doing this? So my dissertation was focused on finding out who is doing employee development. Are they investing in their ministers? And what does that do for their staff? And my primary findings were that, number one, as you would expect, there's a high level of support that the ministers or pastors feel.
Right.
And then number two is that if you're investing in the development of your staff, you're going to have a healthier staff culture.
Mm-hmm.
So my big takeaways from getting that PhD was, how do we continue to invest in our teams and in our staff for the purpose of building a healthy culture on our team?
Right.
No matter what size that team is, it could be 3, could be 5, could be 100, like
mm-hmm.
it is at the Brentwood campus. What are we doing to cultivate a healthy leadership culture? Because that's going to result in healthy ministry.
Yeah. And, people would always tell me, Mike, you're so generous because you support this, you encourage the development of Jay, who's now the senior pastor at Brentwood Baptist Church, and others. My point to them was, it didn't cost me anything.
Yeah.
In fact, what happens is the church does better, The church thrives, and then eventually people come back and go, this is a great church.
Yeah.
and my input was, hey, that's a good idea, Brian. Let's do that.
Well, exactly. And I think the thing, if I had a dream for the research I did during that dissertation was, it's not even how relevant it is for a big church. Because mega churches, they'll put aside budgets to invest in their staff. But even a smaller church, could be one staff, bivocational pastor. If that church said, hey, we're going to give this pastor an extra week of paid time off just so that he can go read or go to a conference, or they give him a book budget. Simple things like that convey a commitment to them and show, hey, we're not only just wanting them to do what we want them to do, but we're interested in their growth.
Yeah.
And they stay longer and that they feel more supported.
See, my understanding of it was I was the steward of you guys.
Yeah.
And I owed it to the kingdom. And I would one day stand before God and I wanted to be able to say, this is who you gave me.
Yeah.
Now look at them.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, and I'm old enough now, been doing this long enough, that I'm more thrilled by you guys' success than I am my own.
Yeah.
When I hear about how things, although it does hurt my feelings a little bit how well Brentwood is doing since I left. I'm trying to be mature about that. But the church is thriving. That's what we prayed for. That's what we worked so hard to make that a good transition for, and that kind of stuff. Now let's go back because a lot of our friends think they have to do everything.
Yeah.
And as a disciple of that philosophy, I can tell you it doesn't work.
No.
It doesn't.
No.
It doesn't work for you as a person. Doesn't work for your church. There's a reason the body has a diversity of gifts. And you heard Brian say that after he was finished preaching, he was relieved. I can tell you, when I'm finished preaching, I'm counting the days till I can get back up so I can finish the thought, or I thrive off of that. Talk about the diversity of gifts and the value of that in the local church.
Yeah. Well, ultimately our role is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. Ephesians 4, that's what we're called to do. And one of the things that I've always loved to see, particularly in my role, this is one of the perks of being in an executive pastor world, is you get to see how God weaves together all these parts.
Right.
You get to see how he brings up and trains up this bubbly, really good with people preschool minister, and how they connect and how he's wired them and gifted them to be hospitable and bring them in. And then all the way to taking somebody who's a high D, assertive, driving leader that can be a catalyst for new initiatives in student ministry or with groups, whatever it is. You see how God weaves together into the fabric all of these different personality and giftings to strengthen the church. I've heard of some churches that try to highlight and identify only one certain gift set or skill set and use that and pigeonhole it for a role.
Right.
But a lot of times what you're doing is you're robbing the opportunity to see how the Spirit brings together this plurality of gifting to build up the body.
Yeah. My thing is it takes takes all of us to express the glory of God. One person cannot do that.
Absolutely.
Or one gift set cannot do that.
Yeah.
So in your role, tell me the handful of things, because it was life-changing for me. And you were there for part of that change when Jim Baker came on.
Yeah.
And there were whole chunks of church life that I didn't know anything about.
Yeah.
I would go by the church and there would be cars, and Jeannie would say, "Who's here?" And I said, "I don't know."
Yeah.
I just know I wasn't supposed to be there.
Absolutely.
So, for those of you who are pastors, I want to help you understand how valuable it is. Now, you may be in a church where you can't afford the executive, but there's somebody in your church who can fulfill this role, and you need to identify and call out their calling in that. So talk to me about how you, Jay, Stan, all work together to accomplish the mission. Jay's kind of wired like I am.
Yeah.
He's got an idea a minute, and here's what we need to do.
And I think
hard driver.
Yeah, I think the big thing is how do we come alongside in our role is that executive, administrative, whatever the function is, come alongside to help implement the vision that's cast by the senior pastor. Obviously, they're going to get that from Scripture and guiding by the Holy Spirit, but how do we come alongside and really make sure that when the pastor says, hey, this is where I want to go, A to Z, that you're able to go from B to Y and connect those dots, because it's really,
well, that was my thing. I told people I can see Z.
Yeah. I
can't see M or P or Q or any of those things.
So I always talk about, it's like, how do I best implement or help to implement that vision, come alongside the senior pastor for that. But then also, how do I remove the obstacles from effective ministry so that our ministerial staff can do that well? Because they're going to be the ones that are carrying all the load of implementing this vision in their individual ministry areas. So how do I come alongside to make sure, one, it's being implemented, but that I'm taking out all the roadblocks and obstacles and administrative things that they don't need to worry about so that they can be freed up to minister.
What do you look for in a good leader?
For me, faithfulness, honestly, just commitment. I always tell our residents when they come in at the church, like, hey, don't come in trying to prove to me that you're good. We wouldn't have brought you in if we didn't think you could be good. Show your faithfulness. Be willing to put your head down and do the stuff that nobody else wants to do. And in my experience at our church, it's been, if you demonstrate faithfulness and commitment, God will, at the right time, allow you to step up and influence.
And lift up. Okay. He's Brian Coates. He's the executive pastor at Brentwood Baptist Church. He's been a friend of mine for
22 years.
22 years. Oh, I'm old. He's got babies now. What, 4?
I got 4, but they're not even babies anymore.
I'm old. I'm feeling every bit of it now. But one of the great privileges I've had is being part of Brian's life and people like him. Now, if you're a pastor of a local church, I want to remind you of a couple of things. One, there is a lot to do in a local church. All of us know that. 2, you weren't supposed to do it all. There are people in your church, maybe on your staff, certainly in your pews, who are gifted to help you do that kind of work. They're gifted in administration. They're gifted in details. They're gifted in things that you don't do well. Call them out. Help them to share the ministry for the success of your local church. And hear me, when that works, and it will because that's the way God designed it, the credit will come back to you. You won't lose any authority. You won't lose any position. You won't lose any of that. In fact, that will be multiplied back to you. That's what happened in my own life. Faithfulness. Show up. Do what you need to do. And over time, God will commend you to other positions and other levels of leadership to best serve the kingdom. He's Brian Coates. I'm Mike Glenn. This is the Engaged Church Network podcast. Thanks for being here.